The invitation arrived on a Tuesday. It was thick, cream-colored cardstock, the kind of paper designed to feel like money, heavy with the weight of its own importance. Annalise held it between her thumb and forefinger, tracing the embossed calligraphy of her name. Not her new name, the one she had reclaimed for herself, but her old one, the one that had belonged to him. Mrs. Annalise Vance. A ghost on an envelope. The return address was the Vance family estate, a place she had once tried to call home and had only ever felt like a trespasser. She knew what it was before she opened it. The invitation wasn't kindness. It was a trap. A summons to her own public execution, orchestrated by the woman who had perfected the art of smiling cruelty, Eleanor Vance. Inside, the script was just as ornate. Eleanor had invited her to witness the wedding of her son, Thomas, to a woman whose name was followed by a string of impressive family affiliations. It was a strategic move, a final, public dismissal. A command performance for the discarded wife. Annalise sank into the worn armchair in her small, quiet apartment, the scent of old books and brewing tea a stark contrast to the memory of the Vance mansion, which always smelled of lemon polish and disappointment. She remembered the last dinner party. Eleanor, moving through the room like a silver-haired shark, had paused behind Annalise's chair. "It must be so difficult," Eleanor had said, her voice loud enough for the table to hear, "to keep up with the conversation when one's background is so modest." But Thomas has such a charitable heart. Annalise hadn't flinched. She had simply placed her napkin on the table and met Eleanor's gaze in the reflection of a silver serving dish. Her silence was a dam holding back a flood of words she knew they didn't deserve. Thomas had studied his wine glass, a portrait of spineless indifference. He never defended her. Not once. Now, holding this invitation, she felt the echo of that same calculated humiliation. They wanted to see her broken. They wanted her to show up looking small and defeated, a cautionary tale for the guests. They wanted to parade their victory. She should have thrown it away. She should have burned it and scattered the ashes. But she didn't. She placed it on her mantelpiece, a stark white rectangle against the warm wood, and let it sit there. It wasn't a threat. It was a question. And for the first time in years, she felt ready to answer it. For 2 years, Annalise had built a life from the fragments they had left her. The world she created was the antithesis of the Vance estate. Instead of a sprawling, cold mansion, she owned a small, thriving bookstore called The Quiet Page. It was a sanctuary of worn spines and whispered stories, tucked away on a cobblestone street. Here, value wasn't measured in stock portfolios or family names, but in the quiet communion between a reader and a book. Her patrons weren't titans of industry. They were students, artists, and elderly locals who came for the carefully curated selection of classic literature and poetry. Her joy was small, but it was real. It was hers. It was in this quiet world that she met Minjun Kong. He didn't announce himself. He simply appeared one rainy afternoon, a tall, impeccably dressed man who moved with an unnerving stillness. He browsed the philosophy section for over an hour, his focus absolute. He didn't seem to notice her, but she noticed him. There was a coiled energy about him, a sense of immense power, held in deliberate reserve. He brought a rare edition of Marcus Aurelius to the counter. "You have a remarkable collection," he said, his voice a low, smooth baritone that seemed to absorb the ambient noise of the room. His English was perfect, accented with a precision that suggested deep thought behind every word. He became a regular visitor. He never spoke of his life, and she never asked. Their conversations were about stoicism, about art, about the quiet strength of forgotten poets. He learned her favorite tea, jasmine pearl, and would sometimes arrive with a small, steaming cup from the cafe next door. He saw her. Not the former Mrs. Vance, not the woman of modest background, but Annalise. The scholar, the reader, the quiet architect of a peaceful life. He saw the steel beneath her gentle demeanor. He was the only person who had ever bothered to look. One evening, as she was closing up, he noticed the invitation still sitting on the mantel of the shop's small, decorative fireplace. He tilted his head, his dark eyes unreadable. "A ghost from a previous life?" he asked softly. Annalise just nodded, the weight of it settling in her chest again. He didn't press. He just watched her, his gaze offering not pity, but understanding. a silent promise of witness. Minjun did not pry into the details of the invitation, but its presence shifted something between them. The air in the small bookstore became charged with unspoken history. He would find her staring at it, her expression a mixture of old pain and new resolve. He understood that the cream-colored card was more than paper. It was a gauntlet thrown down, a challenge to the piece she had so carefully constructed. One evening, after he helped her shelve a new shipment of books, their hands brushing as they reached for the same volume, he finally spoke of it directly. "They wish to see if they broke you," he stated, not as a question, but as a simple, brutal fact. Annalise looked away from his intense gaze, focusing on the spine of a book. "And did they?" she whispered, the question for herself more than for him. He was silent for a long moment, allowing her to answer her own query. When she finally looked up, her eyes clear, she said, "No, they bent me. They never broke me." A slow, rare smile touched Minjun's lips. It transformed his severe features into something unexpectedly warm. "I know," he said. "That is why I enjoy our conversations about philosophy. You have not just read the words, Annalise. You have lived them." Later that week, as the date of the wedding loomed, she found herself confessing her fear. Not a fear of Eleanor, but a fear of her own reaction. A fear that the old feelings of inadequacy would resurface, undoing the work of the past 2 years. She stood by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. "I don't want to go," she admitted, "but I feel I must. To close the door. To prove to myself that it's truly locked." Minjun came to stand beside her, his presence a solid, comforting warmth. He didn't offer solutions or platitudes. He didn't suggest she shouldn't go. He respected her battle too much for that. Instead, he made a simple, devastating offer. "Then you will not go alone," he said. "Allow me to accompany you. Not to protect you, you have no need of that. But simply to be there. As a witness to the woman you are now." It was the phrasing that struck her. A witness. He wasn't offering to be her shield or her weapon. He was offering to be the mirror that reflected her own strength back at her. The decision solidified in her heart. "Okay," she said, her voice firm. "We'll go." The preparation for the wedding became a quiet ritual of self-reclamation. Annalise remembered the agony of dressing for Vance's family events in the past. The endless, subtle critiques from Eleanor about her choices. "That color is perhaps a little loud for your complexion, dear," or "a simpler cut might be more appropriate." Each comment was a small, sharp pinprick designed to deflate and diminish. She had spent years trying to shrink herself into a shape they would find acceptable, a muted version of herself that would not offend their delicate sensibilities. This time was different. She didn't seek out the most expensive designer or the most ostentatious gown. Instead, she found a dress by an independent black designer, a stunning column of deep sapphire silk that fell like liquid night. It was elegant, powerful, and utterly her own. It didn't scream for attention. It commanded it with quiet confidence. When she showed it to Minjun, he didn't shower her with empty compliments about her beauty. He simply looked at her, a profound respect in his eyes. "They will see you," he said. "For the first time, they will truly see you." On the day of the wedding, he arrived at her apartment not in a flashy sports car, but in a discreet, black sedan with tinted windows. The car was an anonymous vessel of immense power, much like the man himself. He wore a flawlessly tailored dark suit, his only adornment a simple, elegant watch. He wasn't there to outshine her, but to frame her. As she walked toward him, he didn't offer his arm in the traditional sense. Instead, he held out his hand, palm up, an offering of partnership, not possession. She placed her hand in his. His grip was firm, warm, and steady. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice low. She took a deep breath, the scent of jasmine from her perfume filling the small space. She thought of the woman who used to cry in the car after every family dinner with the Vances. She thought of the woman who had built a sanctuary from books and tea. They were the same person, but one had finally learned what the other was worth. "I am," Annalise said. And for the first time, she believed it was true. It was not a battle she was walking into. It was a graduation. The Vance estate was a monument to old money and older prejudices. A long, winding driveway cut through acres of aggressively manicured lawns, leading to a sprawling stone mansion that seemed to view the surrounding countryside with disdain. As their car glided to a stop behind a line of European luxury vehicles, Annalise felt a flicker of the old anxiety. It was a ghost sensation, a muscle memory of inadequacy. Then she felt the steady pressure of Minjun's hand on hers, and the feeling vanished, replaced by a profound calm. They were early, deliberately so. They wanted to arrive before the main crush of guests, to choose their own ground. The valets, accustomed to Bentleys and Rolls-Royces, froze for a split second when they saw the quiet authority of Minjun's vehicle and the two men in dark suits who emerged from the front seats to open their doors. Annalise stepped out, the sapphire silk of her dress a slash of vibrant color against the muted greens and grays of the estate. She stood for a moment, letting the cool afternoon air wash over her, her posture poised and her gaze level. She was no longer the frightened girl trying to earn her place. She was a queen visiting a foreign country. Whispers erupted from the small clusters of guests already gathered on the grand stone terrace. They recognized her, the tragic ex-wife, the poor, discarded thing. Their faces held a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. They were expecting tears, a scene, a desperate plea for attention. Annalise gave them nothing. She simply waited, a portrait of serene dignity, as Minjun came to stand beside her. From the corner of her eye, she saw them. Eleanor, resplendent in a pale, icy blue that matched her eyes, stood beside Thomas. Her son looked uncomfortable in his tuxedo, his gaze flickering nervously around the crowd. When Eleanor saw Annalise, a slow, triumphant smile spread across her perfectly made-up face. It was the smile of a predator that has successfully lured its prey into the open. She began to glide toward them, Thomas trailing in her wake like a well-trained dog. The performance was about to begin. Eleanor had written the script, cast the parts, and set the stage. She was certain of the ending. She had never been more wrong in her life. The air grew thin as Eleanor approached, the whispers of the crowd dying into a tense, expectant silence. Eleanor's smile was a masterpiece of social warfare, radiating condescending pity. "Annalise, darling," she began, her voice carrying across the terrace. "How brave of you to come. We were so hoping you'd be able to share in Thomas's special day." She extended a hand, expecting Annalise to take it, to complete the tableau of magnanimous forgiveness. Annalise simply inclined her head, her hands remaining clasped gently in front of her. "Eleanor," she said, her voice calm and even. "Thomas," she acknowledged her ex-husband with a slight nod. Thomas couldn't meet her eyes. He stared at a point just over her shoulder, his jaw tight. Eleanor's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she recovered. Her gaze swept dismissively over Annalise's dress, then landed on Minjun. "And you've brought a friend," she said, her tone suggesting it was a quaint, pitiable gesture. It was at that moment that Minjun, who had been standing slightly behind Annalise, took a half-step forward, into the full light of the afternoon sun. And everything changed. A gasp rippled through the assembled guests. It wasn't a gasp of surprise, but of recognition, of shock, of fear. On the edge of the crowd, a senator paled. A banking CEO, known for his ruthless demeanor, took an involuntary step back. These were men who moved the world, and they looked at Minjun Kong with a deference bordering on terror. They didn't see a friend, they saw the chairman of the Sunhee Syndicate, a global powerhouse with interests so vast and influence so deep that his quietest suggestion could rewrite markets and topple governments. They saw a man who never attended social functions. A man whose presence here, at this wedding, was an event of seismic significance. Eleanor did not recognize him, but she recognized the reaction he caused. Her carefully constructed reality began to fracture. The power dynamic of the entire event had just been inverted. She, the host, the queen of this domain, was suddenly a minor character in a drama she didn't understand. She looked from the terrified faces of her powerful guests to the calm, unreadable expression on Minjun's face. Then she looked at Annalise. And for the first time, she saw her not as the discarded wife, but as the woman standing beside the most powerful man on the lawn. Her trap had not just failed. It had snapped shut on herself. Eleanor's composure, her most prized and sharpened weapon, began to rust in real time. Her smile became a brittle, painted-on thing. "I'm sorry," she stammered, her voice a few notes too high. "I don't believe we've been introduced." Minjun's eyes, dark and impenetrable, met hers. He did not offer his hand. He simply gave a slight, almost imperceptible bow of his head. "Minjun Kong," he said. His name hung in the air, heavy and significant. He then looked at Annalise, his expression softening with a warmth reserved only for her. "I am here with Annalise." The statement was simple, but its meaning was clear. He was not just a date.
He was her ally.
His allegiance was declared. Eleanor's gaze darted around, searching for a foothold in a world that was tilting off its axis. Thomas looked physically ill, his face ashen. He finally met Annalise's eyes, and in them, she saw the full, dawning horror of his loss. He wasn't just seeing the woman he'd thrown away, he was seeing the entire universe he had forfeited, a world of strength and consequence he could never inhabit. He had chosen the safety of his mother's gilded cage, and now he could see the bars. The bride, a young woman named Clara whose primary asset was her father's fortune, drifted over, drawn by the strange tableau. "Is everything all right, darling?" she asked Thomas, her voice light and oblivious. She looked at Annalise with a flicker of competitive assessment, then at Minjun with open curiosity. Eleanor tried to regain control, to sweep the entire uncomfortable moment under the rug of social grace. "Of course, everything is perfect," she chirped, her voice strained. "Annalise was just introducing us to her associate." Annalise corrected her, her tone gentle but firm, delivering the final, devastating blow. "Mr. Kong is my partner," she said. The word hung in the air, redefining everything. Not a friend, not an associate, not a date. A partner, an equal, a chosen future. The crowd, witnessing this exchange, understood. This wasn't a humiliation. It was an ascension. The quiet, discarded wife had returned, not for revenge, but to demonstrate her own quiet, undeniable power. And she had done it without raising her voice. The rest of the ceremony was a blur of surreal theater. Annalise and Minjun were given a wide berth, treated with a mixture of awe and terror. People who had once looked through Annalise now scrambled to catch her eye, offering nervous, sycophantic smiles. She acknowledged them with the same polite, distant grace she had always possessed, but now it was interpreted not as meekness, but as regal authority. They sat at a table near the back during the reception, a small island of profound calm in a sea of rising panic. Minjun spoke little, but his presence was a gravitational force, warping the entire event around them. He would occasionally lean in and murmur an observation to Annalise, something witty and insightful about the ostentatious floral arrangements or the nervous string quartet, and she would answer with a genuine, unburdened smile. They were in their own world, and everyone else was just scenery. The true detonation came during the toasts. The bride's father, a bluff, hearty man who clearly measured worth in dollars, gave a rambling speech about mergers and acquisitions, clumsily comparing the marriage to a corporate partnership. Then Mr. Harrison, the powerful banking CEO who had recoiled at the sight of Minjun, was called upon to speak. He was an old business associate of the Vance family, a key part of their social architecture. He walked to the microphone, glass in hand, looking not at the bride and groom, but directly at the back table. "I would like to raise a glass," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "to Thomas and Clara. To new beginnings." His eyes flickered nervously toward Minjun. "But I would also be remiss if I did not acknowledge the honor of having a true titan of global industry with us this evening." A confused murmur went through the guests who didn't understand. "To vision," Harrison continued, his gaze locked on Minjun. "To integrity. And to the wisdom of knowing true value when you see it." He raised his glass, not to the wedding couple on the dais, but unmistakably toward Annalise and Minjun. In that single, public gesture, the social hierarchy was redrawn. Thomas and his new bride became secondary characters at their own wedding. The entire event had been hijacked, its purpose inverted. The stage Eleanor had built to humiliate Annalise had become the platform for her ultimate vindication, witnessed by the very people whose opinions she valued most. Eleanor sat frozen, her champagne flute untouched, the brittle mask of her smile finally, irrevocably shattered. They didn't stay for the cake. Their purpose had been served, not with a loud confrontation, but with a quiet, undeniable presence. As the orchestra began to play a vapid pop song, Annalise turned to Minjun. "I think I've seen enough," she said softly. He simply nodded, and they stood. Their departure caused another silent ripple through the room. It was a power move, executed with effortless grace. They were leaving not because they were uncomfortable, but because the event was no longer worthy of their time. As they walked toward the exit, Thomas intercepted them, his face a mess of confusion and regret. "Annalise, wait," he said, his voice cracking. Clara and Eleanor were watching from the head table, their faces a mixture of fury and fear. Annalise paused and looked at the man she once loved, the man who had stood by and watched his mother tear her down piece by piece. She felt nothing. Not anger, not pity, not even the ghost of affection. Just a vast, peaceful emptiness where the pain used to be. "What is it, Thomas?" she asked, her tone gentle, as if speaking to a stranger. I didn't know," he stammered, gesturing vaguely toward Minjun. "I'm happy for you, it was a lie, and they both knew it." He wasn't happy for her. He was terrified for himself. He had just realized the true cost of his cowardice. Annalise gave him a small, final smile. It held no malice. "Yes, you are," she said, agreeing not with his sentiment, but with his state of being. "Goodbye, Thomas." They walked out into the cool night air, leaving the wreckage of the Van Cess' perfect party behind them. In the quiet darkness of the car, as the estate's glittering lights receded in the rearview mirror, Minjun finally spoke. He took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her skin. "You are magnificent," he said. It wasn't a compliment on her dress or her appearance. It was an acknowledgement of her spirit. "You didn't need me there tonight, Annalise." "I know," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "But I'm so glad you were." The victory wasn't in their shocked faces. The victory was right here, in this car, holding the hand of a man who saw her strength and chose simply to stand next to it. Weeks passed. The memory of the wedding faded, losing its sharp, triumphant edges and softening into a distant anecdote. It had been a necessary fire, a cauterizing of an old wound, but Annalise found that she did not dwell on it. The satisfaction had been real, but it was also fleeting. The real prize was the peace that followed. Her life returned to its gentle rhythm. The bell above the door of the quiet page tinkled. Patrons browsed the shelves, and the scent of old paper and fresh tea filled the air. This was her victory. Not the momentary terror in Eleanor Vance's eyes, but the enduring, quiet stability of a life she had built with her own 2 hands and her own resilient heart. She had not heard from the Vances, and she never expected to again. Their chapter was closed, the book placed back on a high, dusty shelf. One crisp autumn afternoon, Minjun arrived at the shop. He wasn't wearing one of his severe, powerful suits. He was in soft gray cashmere and dark trousers, looking less like a global chairman and more like a literature professor. He was carrying 2 cups of tea. He handed one to her, jasmine pearl, just the way she liked it. He didn't speak of the wedding or the Vances. He didn't need to. Their shared experience was a silent, foundational stone in their relationship. He walked over to the poetry section and pulled out a slim volume. "Have you read this one?" he asked, his voice the same calm, resonant baritone that had first captivated her. She came and stood beside him, their shoulders almost touching as they looked down at the page he had opened. The poem spoke of finding a home not in a place, but in a presence. It was about the quiet strength of 2 souls who recognized each other. Annalise realized the story was never about revenge. Revenge was a byproduct, a noisy distraction. The story was about her. It was about a woman who was told she was worthless, who had to leave a palace to find her own value in a small, quiet room full of books. The Vances had invited her to their wedding to humiliate her. But all they had managed to do was show her and the world how far she had come. Minjun looked up from the book, his dark eyes holding hers. "They thought power was about wealth and lineage," he said softly. "They don't understand that true power is the freedom to be exactly who you are." He gently closed the book and placed it back on the shelf. "And you, Annalise," he murmured, his voice full of a quiet, profound love, "are the most powerful person I have ever known." In the quiet sanctuary of her bookstore, surrounded by stories of heroes and survivors, Annalise finally understood. She hadn't gone to the wedding to win a war against them. She had gone to sign a peace treaty with herself. And she had won.